Well, good morning. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. You just heard a fantastic presentation from Dr. Lyons that really got to a lot of the trends that are underlying agricultural opportunities. And we're talking about how we can think about how the United States fills that space. But in classic negotiator fashion, I'm going to turn us a little bit more toward the nuts and bolts of how exactly it is that we keep opportunities on the table and we take a look at some of the challenges that are facing us in trade policy and changes in the way that the United States might conduct itself in the global marketplace, and how we can respond to that as an industry. And the theme for your overall conference this week clearly indicates that the global structure is where you're focused. So I probably don't need to remind you how important those export markets are to the animal agriculture industry, but I'm going to do it anyway. I pulled some facts to just sort of frame in your mind how important exports are to our animal ag economy. And I just pulled three of our major exports of animal products: beef, pork, and poultry. The U.S. exports more than $7 billion of beef and beef products annually. And CattleFax estimates that exports add $307 per head in value to U.S. cattlemen. And Mexico and Canada alone account for $2.1 billion of those beef exports. 26% of our pork production is exported. Those exports add $62 in value per head in value to each hog marketed. And exports support around 110,000 jobs in the pork industry. Nearly 1 in 5 pounds of U.S. chicken that is produced is exported. 40% of those exports don't even leave North America. They go mainly to Mexico, Canada, Cuba, and Guatemala. And since we're here in Ohio, I pulled some state figures too. The poultry industry provides more than 6,000 jobs in Ohio alone and accounts for almost $350 million in wages. So simply put, many livestock operations and many downstream jobs are simply not viable or sustainable without export markets. And livestock, more than any other industries, rely on varied markets to be able to sell the varied products that we produce. I can't tell you how many times as the chief ag negotiator I had to explain to my colleagues who work in industrial goods that animals are not like widgets. When you make a transistor or nuts and bolts, you don't make extra parts. But when you want to grow chicken breasts for this market, you end up with some legs and feet and hearts and gizzards too. And you have to find a place to put them. Trade is the way that we add value to every part of the animal that we produce, and we can send it to the place that wants it most. And yet it's agricultural products, and particularly meat and dairy products, that are subject to the highest tariffs that are levied globally. And many of those animal products are also subject to restrictive quotas and state trading mechanisms. And although those tariffs are important, many of you know, and I've worked with some of you on these very issues, that the most difficult and pernicious barriers to trade in animal products are often the sanitary and phytosanitary barriers, or SPS barriers. Once applied, SPS measures are very difficult to remove, and complying with those SPS rules can be challenging both technically and financially. And we also know there are different reasons why those barriers are applied. Some are undoubtedly warranted. It's critically important that we protect our populace and from eating food that may be tainted, and that we protect the livestock and plant health of our species domestically as well. But some of those measures are purely protectionist. They're scientific dressing or regulatory dressing on what really is a trade motivation to keep out foreign product. And many, maybe even most, of some of the barriers we face and try to deal with are frankly somewhere in between. Warranted measures, real risks, but measures applied in a way that make it a little bit more difficult for foreign producers to comply with them than domestic producers do. And lack of transparency and capacity make many of those barriers even more difficult to deal with than they would be necessary. Now, traditionally, your government has successfully used a variety of tools to work on addressing both those tariff and non-tariff barriers. One, they've negotiated free trade agreements with other governments. We use those agreements to eliminate tariff barriers, to enlarge quotas and reduce the role of state trading, and we use them to create more effective ways to address SPS and other rules. We currently have 14 different trade agreements with 20-plus countries where we enjoy greatly expanded access, and the increase in our volume of trade with those countries has far surpassed that of countries where we don't have FTAs. We also use our international institutions, the international organizations like the World Trade Organization, the OIE, and the Codex Alimentarius. We participate in them to create international standards and to provide rules and guidelines for how countries should use them, so that if we meet those standards and are participating in the global market, our product can go more places in a more reliable fashion. But we've also worked with these institutions to provide needed capacity building for foreign scientists and regulators to make sure that they are involved in the development of those standards and to help them implement effective but less trade restrictive SPS measures. Again, going back to those SPS measures and the reason we sometimes face barriers, a lot of that has to do with capacity. If your country can't conduct its own risk assessments, it's easier to simply ban a product if there's concern that it's not safe in the marketplace. So the more capacity they have, the more of a relationship we have, the more likely we are to have measures we can deal with. But we now have an administration that is taking a new look at all of these tools and the way we conduct ourselves in the global trade marketplace. And it's frankly unclear at this point how this administration plans to use those tools and what the international trade agenda would look like. The next several months will be critical, and they will likely determine how we plan to engage with current trading partners and current trade agreement partners in particular, whether we will work to forge new international trade agreements and with whom, and whether we will participate in or invest in those international institutions that we rely on. I want to mention in particular 3 challenges where U.S. trade policy could have significant ramifications for you. And let me start with NAFTA. This is an agreement that has been very positive for U.S. agriculture. U.S. agricultural exports to Mexico and Canada have grown from $10.4 billion in 1993, NAFTA's first year, to nearly $46 billion last year. Today, dairy exports to Mexico are about $1.2 billion, poultry nearly $1 billion, pork $1.3 billion, and beef $1 billion. All of those areas hold at least 60% of the market share in Mexico. They look to us as the supplier of choice. Our customer relationships, our infrastructure is built to deliver product back and forth in that integrated North American marketplace. But if we are renegotiating NAFTA and putting that relationship on the table, what does that mean for the flow of these products? Will we face tariff barriers in moving our product south? Will we lose some of the cooperation we have enjoyed, the goodwill we have enjoyed back and forth with Mexico? If Mexico were to make even small changes to their sourcing, to go from 98% of their corn market, corn imports coming from the U.S. to only 88%, what would that mean to prices received by U.S. farmers? The result would certainly be detrimental and cause a great deal of volatility in our market. Later this month, the administration intends to submit a formal notice to Congress of its intent to renegotiate NAFTA. Some of you may have been watching, and drafts of that letter are already circulating on Capitol Hill. But frankly, what's in the draft doesn't give us much insight as to the process they hope to use or the outcome that they hope to achieve, particularly for agriculture. Now, to be fair, the tone we heard about perhaps withdrawing from NAFTA or full-scale renegotiating has softened greatly. The letter mentions how important those markets are, particularly for agricultural exports. But we also have to remember that when it comes to negotiating, the process defines the outcome. And trade nerds like to refer to modalities, how you're going to talk, or before you get to the what you're going to talk about. You design the negotiation itself to give you the outcome that you want. And so when the administration puts forward that intent to renegotiate to Congress, it kicks off a 90-day period of consultation with Congress, but also consultation with all of you. And that will be a critical period. And the second market, and Dr. Lyons touched on this somewhat, is the dynamism that is occurring in the Asia Pacific. And that includes China, but also includes a number of the countries that were part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which was the focus of much of our trade negotiation and trade policy for the past 7 years. And there was a very specific goal in reaching out to those markets. One is the growth of the middle class. And what was noted in China about the purchasing power happening there is happening also in Vietnam and Malaysia, 2 of our key TPP markets. It's also happening in those mint countries where Indonesia and others see that real growing purchasing power. What TPP would have allowed us to do is to get in sort of in the ground floor when the populations there are able to afford more meat and dairy and poultry, our animal agricultural products, because their incomes had risen to that level. And creating, again, that brand identity, that customer loyalty when those relationships begin is important. And 60+% of the world's middle class is going to be in that Asia-Pacific region by 2030. But the goal was not just to be able to take advantage of the rising export opportunity. It was to use 12 countries who had agreed to a level of ambition at the outset. That is, that every product was on the table and would be liberalized in some way, and that we would work together to achieve the highest standard rules in that trade negotiation. So we would use that ambition to get the highest standard agreement possible. We would implement it, and then we would invite others to join. And what I think is particularly critical about that TPP model was the idea that we have the opportunity to export the way we do business. We tend to operate in a transparent environment where contracts have sanctity. Here in the United States, we provide opportunities like notice and comment in rulemaking, common government practice where we tell you what are rules likely to look like and how we will implement, and we let all of you as citizens, we let other governments, we let industry tell us, hey, maybe you didn't think about X. Or maybe if you did it and alleviated the risk in method Y, you could get the result you wanted, but it would be easier for countries to comply. Those are the kinds of things we tried to build into TPP. First ever measures on SPS rules that would have required notice and comment, would have required transparency about the testing and procedures your products would face at the border, and a stronger than ever commitment to science-based decision-making, requiring real use of risk analysis and evidence when applying those measures. Again, those most pernicious barriers, we could have prevented them, some of them from being put in place before they became real trade irritants. And by having 12 countries at the table, we also got that other piece of ambition that I talked about, that commitment to putting every product on the table. Because if you look globally at the hundreds of crisscrossing trade agreements that countries have, some of them are quite high quality, but a number of them just sort of push those difficult issues to the side. And they're more agreements of convenience, and the other issues just don't make it to the negotiating table. Well, it won't surprise any of you to know that those issues are typically agricultural ones. And a lot of countries simply don't put either all of their ag sector or part of the ag sector on the table because it's very politically sensitive, and the barriers are often directly tied with government intervention. So what we did in TPP was say, if you want to be in, you have to be all in. And because countries were getting not just access to one other market, but to 12 countries and the integrated supply chains that created, they were willing to put it on the table. In the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement and in NAFTA, we didn't have access, and we don't have access to Canada's market for dairy, poultry, and eggs. All 3 of those items were on the table in TPP. Now, we didn't get full access out of them, but we got access that would have created new opportunities for those industries, all in animal products. And Japan, in negotiating free trade agreements, has what it calls 6 sacred products that simply aren't on the table or hadn't been in past agreements. So that was beef, pork, dairy, wheat, rice, and sugar. Areas of pretty strong interest for the United States in terms of our exports into that Japanese market. All of those items, again, on the table in TPP and the opportunity for new access in getting them. The next administration has noted, or this current administration has noted, that the Asia-Pacific market is an important one, but that they don't think the TPP model, that regional model, is an appropriate one, and instead we should move forward bilaterally. But it's not clear which countries will be the target or we will reach out to for those bilateral negotiations first. And it's not clear you can achieve that normative value influencing the way countries do business, the way they shape their SPS regimes, with one-off relationships one to the other, instead of creating a community of regulators who will all be putting their SPS regimes on the table together. Now, no one gets very excited, moving to the third area of challenge, our international institutions. No one gets very excited in thinking about meetings of the WTO, the Codex, or the OIE. There's some pretty technical issues that are on the table there. But these organizations are responsible for creating a framework that allows trade to happen while also making sure that health is protected. And agricultural trade is greatly increasing in both volume, value, and variety. So these institutions, to ease the transition and the movement of those products, are more and more important than ever. But unfortunately, they're increasingly less effective as they deal with higher volumes. So we need to invest more in these institutions, but the approach of putting America first may mean that we have a tendency to pull back from them. The Codex, for example, has been dominated for a long time by an EU-based approach. It has been faced with the temptation to include social and other factors in its decision-making instead of sticking to its mandate of making decisions and passing standards based only on science. The United States has always contributed top-notch experts and scientists to the committees there, but we haven't invested enough in the infrastructure of the institution itself. And we need to increase developing country voices in the Codex in that system to make sure that the agendas of those organizations address their needs. They deal with giving them standards for the food additives, for the vet drugs, for the products they're actually seeing on their borders and they have to make decisions about. And we have to rely on their expertise and find ways to allow them to participate in forming those standards so they feel some ownership in applying them and giving more certainty to your exports. Those are 3 particular areas of challenge where the next several months will be critical in deciding which way we go. How will we renegotiate the NAFTA? What will we do in the Asia-Pacific region that will take the place of the agreements that we've chosen not to advance? And how can we make sure that the United States has a role in building the institutions that create the groundwork for agricultural trade to take place? So now I'm going to focus on, besides those challenges, what are your opportunities? What can you do specifically to make sure that U.S. animal agriculture remains competitive? The first one I would recommend, remind your trading partners, remind your customers that you view them as long-term partners, despite some of the short-term changes in our rhetoric. Get out there, talk to your customers in other countries, make clear that they understand that you see them as a vital part of your business going forward, because what they are hearing is the opposite. And you've seen in the press lately that leaders in the U.S. dairy industry, in the U.S. corn industry have made those trips, and some of those discussions have not been easy, but they've certainly been appreciated, that the bonds business to business are not necessarily different, even if some of the language that our governments are using might be. 2, talk to the governments. While you're in those countries talking to your customers, make sure you meet with their agriculture and trade officials as well. Let them know that there's a strong domestic voice in the United States, not a partisan one, but one based in industry that sees the need to preserve and strengthen our trade partnerships and that you are working to do so. And while you're at it, Use those strong relationships that you have forged with your customers and with partner governments to make sure you continue to update them in the advances and the innovations you are using in agriculture, so there are no surprises when we're exporting new products, when we're using new methods, that we've built confidence and transparency with them about those new methods, and we can reduce the trade barriers or the suspicion that they might feel. 3, engage directly as animal agriculture with these international institutions. You will need to invest in them because governments can't do it alone. Work with them to remain viable and responsive both to food safety and animal health issues. Their ability to develop standards in a timely, effective, and impartial way brings legitimacy and trust to your industry as a whole. Industry, frankly, hasn't found a way yet to be an effective partner. And that's not just industry's fault. There are concerns about impartiality or pay-to-play scenarios. But the slowness of these institutions without that private sector partnership really means few products get the scrutiny they deserve and fewer products flow freely across borders. Coming back to the United States, number 4 is to ask for a seat at the table in forming the U.S. strategy for renegotiating our trade agreements or for establishing new ones. The White House, the Department of Commerce have been meeting with groups across different industries and agriculture. Make sure you are one of them. We don't yet have a Secretary of Agriculture or a U.S. trade representative, but be the first to knock on their door when they are in place. Let them know the challenges and the priorities you have for foreign markets. And be the first to knock on the door when that new team of deputies comes in. The USTR, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Commerce, they have to set a vision, but it's those deputies, the undersecretaries, the new Chief Agriculture Negotiator who have to figure out how to get it done. They are kind of the nuts and bolts folks in the new team. Make sure they know exactly what your priorities are, but also make sure that to tell them that you want them to work together and that you expect them to do so. And think beyond just USTR and USDA. Think about FDA. Think about folks in the Foreign Commercial Service who help us to export animal products, machinery, things that aren't always classified just as agricultural goods, but whose exports have an impact on what all of you do as well. There will be many meetings where the Chief Ag Negotiator is not in the room, but maybe the Undersecretary of Agriculture is, or vice versa, in the way things work in government. If there's a consistent voice for the importance of trade for U.S. agriculture, no matter who is at that table, that will come to benefit you. So having a strong ag team in the administration is critically important and was certainly important for how I did my job over the past 7 years. And think in particular about how to use the new Undersecretary for International Trade at USDA. That job in particular is a new one, and that person will be tasked in bringing to bear the regulatory and the policy power of USDA's people to get the most advantage in the international marketplace. And be prepared to tell them exactly what you will do to help them achieve the priorities you set. How you will overcome barriers and perceptions about the U.S. ag industry. We heard from millennials, we heard from Dr. Lyons that there are perceptions both positive and negative about agriculture, and industry has to help shape them. And remember that there are likely to be fewer government resources available under a new budget regime for the government officials to perform some of those tasks. Use Congress as your backstop. Members of Congress are asking all the right questions about what a new trade policy might mean and what its impact might be on U.S. exports. Make sure they know your priorities, they have the information that they need, and that you partner with them. And number 8, tell your story to those lawmakers to arm them, to your fellow industry partners, and to all of your customers. Demonstrate how your participation in the global economy in fact puts America and Americans first. Animal agriculture creates a variety of different jobs, adds value throughout the supply chain, and continues to improve efficiency and provide vital protein in more efficient and sustainable ways. But you can't be the creators of value if you don't have the stability and the expanded opportunity provided by maintaining current markets and gaining access to new ones. And last, build that story that you have into the fabric of your business. What I hear from consumers and governments around the globe is that they seek out U.S. products because they are known for being high quality, consistent, and safe. And no free trade agreement or international standard is going to change the fact that consumers want to know more and more of the story behind their food. To remain a supplier of choice, you have to make sure you can demonstrate and verify the quality and safety that your products are known for. Thoughtfully executed, the same information that you collect for a marketing claim can also be used to create the chain of custody and traceability information you're going to need to comply with safety protocols for animal health. So now is the time to build information infrastructure that will provide traceability and demonstrate integrity and accountability, whether you're showing BSE compliance or facing compliance with an organic standard. Technology can help here. We already saw on WeChat how you can aggregate data and build platforms that can track and consolidate information and ease the burden on farmers, packers, shippers, and others to make the case for your products. We live in a very complex world, and we are meeting at a particularly uncertain time about exactly how America is going to engage in that world. But that uncertainty creates opportunities in the next several weeks and months for this industry in particular to play a part in defining how your government engages with foreign counterparts, the priority they place on maintaining and expanding ag markets, and the real challenges that you yourselves have is as key leaders in a larger international conversation. How will you position yourselves among governments, international organizations, and industries about how it is exactly you want to be part of feeding that growing population? So I wish you great luck in meeting those challenges and making your voice heard. Thank you very much.